Hey, how's it going, captains? Admiral Tori here, and welcome aboard for another World of Warships video on my channel. In today's video, I am going to be talking about the Tier 7 Premium Royal Navy battleship, the HMS Nelson. So the Royal Navy has been out for quite some time, and there are still people out there who question how good is the Nelson? What is the Nelson like to play, and what makes her unique? And part of that reason is because she is a unique ship in her own class as a ship, historically speaking, because just look at her. But more specifically, she is the only non-tier 9 premium free XP ship. So what do you get when you play the Nelson? So right away, from the North American perspective, North America server, the Nelson is not a popular battleship. And I'm just going to get straight to the biggest flaw with the Nelson. And personally, I hate that fact, but this will dictate whether you like the Nelson or you don't, or basically how you should be playing the Nelson because of this fatal flaw. I mean, every ship that you play depends on the flaw of the ship. If the ship has, horrible armor, then you won't be expected to go against cruisers that often, or at least charge into a world of HE spam. If your ship has a big citadel, it just doesn't make sense to show your broadside all the time. And unfortunately, in this case, the worst nightmare for any battleship player is that the Nelson currently has the worst citadel in this game. As a matter of fact, this is up there with the Yamato in some sense, but this is by far worse than the Yamato, because the Yamato still has armor. It's just that her citadel placement isn't that great, and in the case of the Nelson, her citadel is massive. Her placement isn't that great because it's so predictable from all the way to the rear, where the secondaries are here. The only secondaries that you can find on the Nelsons are located at the stern, all the way to the front of the not necessarily at the bow, but turret A. And this fact, if you can't handle citadels, as a matter of fact, right now people aren't playing Japanese battleship as often because they are currently, as a nation, has the worst citadel in comparison to all the other nations. Because now it used to be neck and neck with the Americans, but this is worse than me playing the old Iowa. I don't know how many people remember the old Iowa and Montana when the citadel is above the waterline, but this is far worse. And as a result, full health, if you show broadside at a New Mexico at 6 kilometers, you will automatically lose. I got into situations where there's just no options to do with the Nelson. You're forced to show broadside. I mean, yes, people always say that don't show broadside. Of course, you don't want to show full broadside, but when you get into a situation where you're pushed to show broadside, you're going to have to cross your fingers that nobody will notice you and turn your ship before somebody blasts your citadel out of the water. I had an incident where a Colorado was 11 kilometers away, and my priority target, which I will talk about some of my captain skills, tells me that nobody's looking at me, so I thought it was the opportune time to do it. But the Colorado noticed, and as a result, I went from 90% HP to absolute 0. I mean, my heart felt cold. So yeah, that is the problem. So if you're interested in the Nelson and you're concerned about the citadel placement, don't bother with the Nelson. Save your money and get something like the Scharnhorst. I think the Scharnhorst is a lot more forgiving compared to Nelson. Nelson requires high discipline and enforcing your knowledge about your ship. So expect passive plays. This isn't a ship that you rush in from side to side. Now, don't get me wrong. The Nelson is actually a very strong brawler, up until the point when the ship gets to your broadside. More specifically, I find her very strong against cruisers. So she's kind of like a cruiser killer brawler, but not necessarily. My other problem with the Nelson is that I don't know the exact Sigma value for Nelson. I want to guess 1.8, but regardless, from experience, she has good dispersion. And when I say good dispersion, we're talking about the horizontal. So if you were to fire full broadside to a target and you look from the leftmost shell to the rightmost shell, they're pretty tightly close to each other. And also, because of this special turret layout, all of your firepower is well grouped. And this is something you will notice as you play these type of ships, so like the Dunkirk or the Izumo. Well, as a matter of fact, those are the only two alternative battleships to this similar layout currently. You'll always get good dispersion and good grouping. But in the game, although I state this fact, Nelson can be extremely frustrating when hitting targets at a distance and even at close range. And I think part of that reason is because of her Sigma. Now, my Sigma guess, if I remember correctly when she was released and all the information, was 1.8, maybe 1.7. I think it might be 1.7. But whatever the case is, forget the numbers. From experience, her vertical dispersion is pretty bad, and I think this offsets her benefits. So it kind of balances out in a sense that she has great grouping, great horizontal dispersion because of that grouping, but the vertical is a killer, which means that your shots will either fall short or long at times. Sometimes one shell might be, when you aim at the waterline at a target, sometimes there's one shell that flies way above the superstructure while another one falls short. That's what I'm talking about. The accuracy of a battleship or the performance of the guns are usually not determined by the dispersion or grouping, but mainly by the vertical dispersion, because it doesn't matter how great the grouping is. If the shell flies over or flies short, you're not hitting the target at all. And she definitely struggles against something like King George V, because the King George V is a low profile ship. Just look from the water to deck is very low. So when I face King George V, I tend to struggle against these guys trying to hit them. But then again, King George V have her own problems. Look at Scharnhorst. She's also a low profile ship. Ships I like to shoot at is maybe Nagato, because she's a high profile ship, and same thing goes with the Colorado. So she's mainly effective against Nagato and Colorados because of how high they sail. Now cruiser wise, yeah, because they usually tend to be low profile, but well, maybe not the Fiji. The Fiji is fairly high off the water. So those are the two big things that drives me nuts with the Nelson. Anything else? Any other problem? Well, AA is kind of abysmal, but not that bad. I mean, the Japanese are known for a horrible AA, and you can clearly see that the Nagato has a higher rating compared to the Nelson. Usually rating, when you have a higher rating, means it has better AA. Sometimes there are special ships out there that have higher rating than another ship, but the other ship has a better AA performance for certain reasons like caliber size or defensive fire. But yeah, AA is not that great. I don't think torpedo protection is that great. Well, maybe it's 21%. Let's see. Yeah, it's not that great. Well, if you compare it to the Germans, even the Germans have better torpedo protection. So bad torpedo protection, mediocre AA defense, and slow. Now, slowness isn't as big of a problem because we established the fact that you're going to be pretty passive with the Nelson, okay? If you're going to be effective with the Nelson, you're going to be fairly passive, and it's extremely important to understand what you're up against, because you can't really rush against a battleship that has 400 6mm guns. They're just going to end you. Now, adding one bit to the armor, there is actually one benefit from the Nelson compared to all other ships, and maybe a little bit to the Scharnhorst, not so much, but the universal number at tier 8 that everyone knows as a battleship is 32mm. And the reason why that is an important number is because it balances the 406 and 410 millimeter guns. That is the common average big caliber guns. And other than that, the other common caliber might be 380. And of course, the only ship or the only caliber in this game that can actually penetrate 32 is the Yamato's 460 millimeter. I think the Conqueror has like 450 some ish, and it's very similar in size, but it doesn't overmatch the 32 millimeters. And the reason why this is an important number is because Nelson can deal with ships at tier 8 fairly well if the player doesn't have any knowledge about how the Nelson operate. Because although she has a big citadel, she has 32 millimeter armor all around, from the belt to the middle portion of the ship. The only part of the ship that isn't 32 is the bow and the stern, which means that if a Nagato or even something like the Iowa continues to fire and the shells tends to land right here or here, they're just going to do absolutely zero damage, which is great. But if the Iowa has any sense of knowledge of the ship's vulnerability, in this case, the Nelson's bow and the stern, she will constantly do a ton of penetration damage. And if she's close enough, she will overmatch it and hit the citadel. It happens all the time. I lose against Colorados and Nagato's in situations where they know that they should be shooting the bow of the ship and trying to hit this aft-worked ship citadel. So that is where the Nelson loses. But one thing I do in particular is that I tend to try to bait the shots, making it slightly angled like this. If I angle the Nelson like this, what enemy ships tend to do is that they like to shoot the belt because they think they can hit the citadel, but that just bounces away. So that's something you should be aware of, where you're going against somebody who knows how to deal with a Nelson by shooting their shells, 406 millimeters, of course. Even 380, I think, can penetrate 25 millimeters at the bow, and that is it. Something like the Nagato and Colorado, they're all 25 millimeter round, except this middle portion inside the Nagato, which is very well protected against the falling shell. I know there is a better word for it. I use it several times, but I kind of forgot top of my head. So yeah, gotta be aware that the Nelson is extremely vulnerable, and since she's 32 millimeters all over the place, cruisers love to damage the Nelson with HE. But Nelson, if you ever hear anything about the Nelson, she has the best repair party. Her repair party is tier 9, tier 10 Royal Navy level. Now, understanding repair party mechanics is that, you know, there are certain parts of the ship that you can repair, but once it's go beyond the damage, you can't repair as much as before. So the first repair is usually the biggest, and after that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and sooner or later it's just gonna be like abysmal repair. So that is the upside. So her armor, you know, 32 millimeter, and her repair party are an HP pool. Now another problem with the Nelson that further proves the point that you might want to be much more cautious. I wouldn't say passive, but cautious about playing the Nelson is that her size. I mean, she's the biggest tier 7 ship. Absolutely massive. Like, yeah, Scharnhorst has the length. King George V, she has the belt armor. Nagato, she has the height. But Nelson is just a massive ship. She's thick. I mean, it is it's pretty known that Nelson is a massive target, and people tend to shoot at Nelson in the North American server because she's big, she's tier 7, and she's not a common ship that people see at seas. But she is actually my most favorite tier 7 battleship currently. I know that's kind of big. Maybe the Scharnhorst might be higher, but I like her in terms of Royal Navy. I just like the way she looks. I like her, you know, her design. She has a very interesting design history alongside with her sister ship HMS Ronnie, which took part against the Bismarck, the hunt for the Bismarck. But she's very interesting. As a matter of fact, what makes her unique as a Royal Navy battleship in this game is that she is equipped with 406 millimeter guns, which are 16-inch. Besides that, the most common caliber is 380 from the Royal Navy for quite some time, and I believe the Lion is the first Royal Navy ship in the main line that you're able to be equipped with 400-ish millimeters. I think it's 410 or 406, doesn't matter. Conqueror, of course, has both big ones and small ones. But in terms of that luxury, it's pretty nice. So there's another flaw with the Nelson I forgot to mention that relates to the guns, aside from the dispersion and citadel, is that although you have 406 millimeter guns, these guns will have very weird performance. Okay, being tier 7, let's start with tier 7. You're going up against tier 5, tier 6 matchmaking at times, and 406 millimeter gun is excessive in the sense that you might shoot full broadside cruisers and hit the citadel, but you actually over penetrate the citadel or over penetrate cruisers a lot because of how big the caliber is. So that's a problem with 406 millimeters. But if you go up tier against like in North Carolina, Amagi, 406 millimeters, 400 millimeter guns are, you know, standards kind of caliber, and they do massive amount of damage. Yeah, you have the caliber, but the Nelson is equipped with these Mark, I don't know, whatever, Mark 1B, whatever that number is, but whatever that number is, she, along with the tier 6 Japanese battleship Mutsu, have pre-war shells, I think. I think that's what I described. I'm not sure these shells are pre-war, but the Mutsu has pre-war Nagato shells, and the problem with that is that they tend to shatter. And I don't know what that means. Maybe because it might be short fuse, even though the icon says that the icon picture is a shatter, but sometimes that also means that you fail to penetrate because your shell exploded too early. But in this case, with the Mutsu, it's frustrating that, you know, you have the caliber to penetrate whatever armor is, but your shell doesn't quite have the right property to do damage, because they are either short fuse or maybe the steel strength isn't quite there to actually maintain the integrity of the shell before it shatters and, you know, do no damage. So that's the problem with the 406 millimeter guns. They over penetrate low tiers and they tend to shatter in the high tier. As a matter of fact, I get better penetration result with the War Spy, in my opinion. I might be wrong statistically if you take a look at, you know, the stats specifically, but I feel from an experience that sometimes these 406 just refuse to actually penetrate targets, even though these are 406 millimeter. So let's finish off with the captain skills. Now I'm still training my captain. I decided to participate in the event, the Azure Lane event. Don't worry, the gameplay doesn't have the female captain voice. I put the regular national voice. I just have her because I think it's fitting to have a free XP ship that is currently unique because she's the only tier 7 free XP ship, alongside with the commander that is going out with the event. And a lot of people are just running out with their pitchforks, but hey, I'm talking about the captain skills, something that we can all understand in the same language. So the first skill I grabbed is priority target. Now, is either priority target or preventive maintenance. I went with priority target to get an idea how many people are focusing me, so I know who's might be shooting on my broadside and when to not charge in too hard, because sometimes I get into situations where there's 5 people targeting me. And part of that reason is because, like I said, this is a unique ship that not many people see, and when you don't see the ship that often, people tend to want to shoot at it. So I grabbed that. Next skill I will grab is Adrenaline Rush, and then I grab Expert Marksman. You don't necessarily need Expert Marksman because the Nelson, because of her special turret configuration, you're gonna be pointed in one general direction most of the time, but I still grab it just because sometimes I really need to rotate these 180 around for whatever reason it is. And plus, I can't use the ship to rotate the guns because remember, the Citadel is a concern. Number 1 priority is to protect your Citadel before you do anything else. Next skill I will grab is either basics of survivability to reduce the fire damage duration, and of course flooding, but that doesn't really matter because flooding tends to kill battleships anyway. But either that, or which I might plan on getting right away, is superintendent, just for the extra charge of the repair party, which is sometimes questionable because by the time you use the 4th one, it's not that effective. But if you want, you know, if you don't plan on getting the extra 4th charge, if you play Nelson and you don't get enough 4th charge use, then try grabbing basics of survivability. Next up, I would probably grab Concealment Expert because people love to shoot at Nelson and it would be nice to just disappear. She's gonna play like the Yamato. Yamato really depends on concealment. She plays like the Iowa back when she had her Silda way above the waterline. She depends on the concealment, so I will probably grab this. After that, you're free to pick whoever you want. You might go back for preventive maintenance. You might get AFT because although her secondaries isn't that great, it's kind of interesting to have them in the rear. You might even go for manual secondaries just for the shits and giggles, but that is the most important crucial skills you want to get right away. In terms of the module upgrades, I used to have steering gear modification 2, which is the most common one for most battleships I play, but I decided to go for damage control system modification 2 because I know people want to burn the crap out of the Nelson, and I'm not going to be moving a lot, moving left and right a lot, so it doesn't really make sense that I need this because, if I'm going to make the turn, this just reduces the time to turn the rudder. It does not reduce the turning circle. So if I'm determined to make the turn, all I have to do is that before I start going full speed, I shift my rudder all the way and then make it go full speed. I might grab this, but I don't think that's gonna be useful. I think it's only up to like the first 8 knots, but I went for this for sure. Of course, I want to improve the accuracy, so I went for this. Anything that's damage control, and of course, I would definitely recommend you at least grab this first if you're gonna grab the ship. And part of that reason is because your life is really depending on the guns. I mean, having 406mm guns, I mean that is the soul of the Nelson. So if they get knocked out all the time, because the Royal Navy, one thing about Royal Navy guns is that their angle is just awful. I mean, if you compare this to something like the Scharnhorst, the Scharnhorst has way better angles and I think better armor in general. But whatever the case is, you can't really incapacitate the Scharnhorst that easily because of how well it's angled, while the Nelson, it's flat. The King George V is flat. Well, King George V is worse, but you get the idea. If the enemy decides to shoot at the flat side of your turret, they tend to incapacitate your gun, so it might be a good idea to grab this. If you don't believe me, take this off, play the Nelson, see often how people incapacitate your guns. If you don't do it as often, maybe you want to grab something else. I don't really care. Maybe this, but yeah, it doesn't matter to me. So let's get right into the game and let me show you what a typical Nelson game is. It's just a recent game. It's not my best game. I have a video where my first Nelson video that I uploaded a long time ago when she was released. I didn't really do a full video, but I think that's a better representation of a good scenario of fun game with the Nelson down in the description if you wish to check it out. So without further ado, let's jump right into the Nelson. Alright, welcome aboard the Nelson. So I am playing on Two Brothers, and I'm about to fire my first opening salvo, which unfortunately will miss that Mahan. I'm not surprised because the Mahan is pretty far away, but hey, you never know, you might hit the ship and score big hits. So I did miss one detail with the Nelson at port, and that is that she has great fire chance with her HE, and I assume that everyone knows that because that is a distinct characteristics for the Royal Navy battleships. But of course, a lot of people kind of misunderstand how to use the two ammo types at times with the Royal Navy. Some people excessively use HE, and others might excessively use AP unless you're in the Conqueror, because the Conqueror doesn't matter whether you use AP or HE, you're just gonna get something in return. So in the Nelson, I'm going to make this clear, but the dominant ammo type is AP. Please use the AP because you have 406mm guns. They're big caliber guns, and it'd be really nice to smack people hard on their broadside with these 406mm guns. Now, the only time I use HE is that I know the target use their damage control, which means that it might be nice to set 2 fires or 3 fires, but mainly in this scenario, because I actually got a matchmaking where I am down tier, bottom tier, so most of the battleships are tier 9. If you get in the matchmaking where there are tier 9 battleships that tends to sit bow on, or they're far away, HE might be a preferable ammo type. mainly bow on because your AP shells just not gonna do any damage. I mean, that's kind of obvious. But if they're not bow on, please use AP, because AP is the reason why the Nelson exists. The reason why she has big guns. Just like that, I scored some decent hits on that, what was that, the Hipper. So as you might have noticed, I'm getting really great grouping for the Nelson compared to something like the Colorado or Nagato. It's because of this special gun layout. So I'm going to fire another salvo at the Neptune. Like I said, the vertical dispersion is painful at times, and I think this is also a situation where it kind of shows how bad the vertical dispersion. Look how high the highest shell and how low the lowest shell is. It's just disgusting. But then again, the Nelson currently is the only battleship that is equipped with 406mm guns in a triple gun turret layout. While all the other ships, in terms of tier 7, of course tier 8 North Carolina, tier 9 Iowa, Izumo, and all the other ships, but at tier 7, she's the only ship that has triple guns per turret that are 406mm. The only other triple gun turret I can think of at tier 7 is the Scharnhorst. So I'm going to fire at the Alsace, even though she is angled, hoping to land on her deck and penetrate, but yeah, they're just going to ricochet. So you can kind of get an idea when you're going against a high tier battleship, which means that you might want to switch to HE, but I persist to stay with AP because at any moment now, a ship might show broadside. So you notice how I'm very cautious about my approach, and some people will call out, well, you're playing way too passive. Well, the ship is do or die. If you're just not convinced about what I'm saying, when you get the Nelson and you charge in, you will find out the hard way, because after playing 50 games, 70 games, I don't know how many games I played with Nelson, I learned that, you know, even if you have full health and you show broadside, you know you can survive a typical broadside in any other battleship. Nelson is just not having it. She's just going to get punished and you're just going to get deleted. And of course, like I said, people love to shoot at ships that are not common in the matchmaker. So I'll switch to HE just for that moment, and I'm going to switch back to AP because I think I'm going to try to focus on these cruisers. Scored 4 penetration, but unfortunately got 1 fire. So right here is a perfect display of why you should use AP with the Nelson, and being very careful about your approach. So I got set on fire. 2 fires are set. I'm gonna put them out, and I'm going to fire a broadside salvo at that Amagi. I think this should be good. No, I was just really kidding. Maybe next salvo. Yeah, totally forgot. First one was just a fluke, but don't worry, the second salvo, I promise you, it should be better than this one at the Amagi. I think I start firing at the Cleveland. Maybe not, but Amagi is firing HE for whatever reason it is. But here we go. Take 2. First one is just a prank. Second time, I'm pretty serious. Yeah, that looks much better. So look at that grouping. Good grouping. This time vertical dispersion looks also good, and they're gonna land right on the decks of that Amagi. Score 18,000 damage. Yeah, please use AP. So I'm backing up slowly because I'm trying to get out of the range of the Cleveland. I'm letting the fire burn. I mean, it doesn't really matter if I damage control. Sometimes I like to let 2 fires burn on the Nelson just to use my repair party, because look at that. That repair party can really repair my ship. But I won't use it right away because I thought the Amagi will set another fire on me, and I think she does, maybe not. Another salvo. That one's 3 penetration, but it only does like a decent amount of damage, not as big as before. As you might have known how the damage works in this game, a full HP ship will take a lot more damage than a half HP ship or a ship that has already taken damage. So that's why that salvo wasn't as deadly as the first one. Going to fire a salvo at the Cleveland. Good grouping again, and got lucky with 1 Citadel. So you can kind of see how she's very potent against cruisers. That's the only time I can think of the Nelson can just charge in and just, you know, charge at the cruiser, unless they have torpedoes, of course. You gotta be aware of torpedoes, but charging at cruisers, having the repair party, because most likely the cruiser is going to spam HE. You're just gonna repair it all up while you have 406mm guns, and the cruisers just can't do much against you. So right there, I use my repair party. You can actually repair up to the first repair party. The most I've ever repaired was like 70% of the ship's HP, but but I decided to use it anyways in this game. Fire another salvo. Well, that one's coming from the turret. And we managed to hit something on it, but it bounced off the Amagi. Here goes a bigger salvo. And now I'm going to push in and try to take the A flag. So the skill that you would take out on Nelson is just planning, being aware, and watching the map. Everything depends on your map. It doesn't matter how well you aim, everything depends on your map. And some would complain, like I said, you're playing too passive, but trust me, when you get into high tier matchmaking, especially with Nelson, you want to be very cautious. I mean, there will be a situation, without a doubt, that it might be ideal, even if you're, in a situation you shouldn't rush in, but you should because of that specific scenario, just to win the game, of course. If you have to do it, do it. I strongly believe in that fact. Just make sure you don't look stupid when you do it. That's the key. So firing at the Scharnhorst, as we know it, the Scharnhorst bow and stern is about 25 millimeters, if I recall correctly. So my 406 should be able to penetrate and do a decent amount of damage. I was hoping the Scharnhorst will show broadside, but it looks like she isn't. Sometimes I face players who know how to play battleships and they don't show broadside, and that's when I start switching to the HE. So I'm pushing forward. The LSAS is also going to contest our friendly Iowa on our starboard side. Now, I'm not sure what the Iowa was thinking. I think the better choice, if I was that Iowa, was to slow down and slowly wither the LSAS. But it looks like the Iowa was determined to try to one-on-one the LSAS. Doesn't really matter because we are already on the winning side. I decided to switch my focus to LSAS to help the Iowa. And right there, when the Iowa is broadside, I think the LSAS will be able to take her out. And she should fire, I think, right about now. Now? Maybe now. Maybe not. Okay, now. Hurry up. Now. Now. LSAS fire. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Oh, there we go. She did fire with her rear turrets. So I'm going to fire at the LSAS. Of course, I'm stopping trying to slow down because the LSAS can get a free 50,000 damage sink by ramming me. Score 3 penetration. I'm showing slight broadside because I'm trying to bait the LSAS guns to shoot my belt armor, of course, because I don't want her shooting my bow. Remember, if you know the weakness of the Nelson, you're going to suffer horribly. At this point, now it is down to only 2 battleships. Oh, look at that. That is a beautiful grouping, beautiful dispersion. And yeah, I'm guessing one of the shells flew short, or a lot of them, but one over penetration, I believe, and one shattered. That one bounced right off the dirt turret of the Scharnhorst. Now the Amagi is showing broadside. I'm going to fire. Now I should be firing. I should be angling the opposite direction of the Amagi's approach, as in I should be turning to port, but I am turning to starboard instead. You have a better chance of bouncing shells that way, if you understand how, even though I angle, but it's more effective I angle the opposite direction of the ships that are sailing. But in this case, it doesn't really matter because pretty much the Amagi is gonna go down. I'm not sure if I secured this kill on the Amagi. Fire one big salvo. Amagi returns with HE, and unfortunately, somehow they miss. So I don't think I get the kill on the Amagi, or do I? No, the Amagi is actually using the repair party, so I might able to get the kill. Fire one defining salvo at the Amagi, and yes, we do secure the kill at the bow, I believe, of the Amagi, or maybe a little bit before the bow, because if I had actually hit the bow, it would have been over penetration. Fire a salvo at the Scharnhorst. Scharnhorst is showing broadside, and booyah! 10,000 damage, 3 penetration, and that ends the game. So aside from that, I hope you guys find this video informative to make your decision on getting the Nelson, and I'll see you guys next time on World of Warships.